Welcome to another stream this evening coming from Denver, Colorado. It's just after 9:30 p.m., so kind of an evening stream. We're having some thunderstorms roll through, so hopefully we don't have any power outages or anything, although we don't have that many power outages in my neighborhood. But tonight we're going to be talking about Logic Pro for iPad a little bit. This really comes after using it for about a month on this trip I took. I do a study abroad program with students in the Czech Republic, and I brought my laptop actually, but I didn't use Logic on my laptop once. And so instead I used Logic Pro for iPad with my SSL12 solid state logic interface. And it was an experience. There were some parts of it which I really learned a lot about this app. And now, after we've had this app out for a couple months, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions about what Apple's thinking, what their plan is long term. And some actual organized thoughts about it too, but I'm hoping we'll have a conversation tonight. So those of you who are joining, welcome. Make sure you let me know in the chat who you are and where you're coming from, because it's kind of cool to get to know people as they're joining the live streams. But we're going to be looking a little bit at some of the questions I have about this app and Logic in general, because it wasn't too long ago when Apple had this series of products called iWork and iLife, two bundles. One of them was iTunes and all the fun apps, and then they had the work apps like Pages and Keynote and all of those. And they were all desktop apps first. And eventually, when the iPad was released and even on the iPhone, they put out very light versions of these apps. And I'm getting kind of some puffs of air, so let me change my audio settings just for a second. Okay, cool. And so they had these really light versions on iOS. And eventually, they would add some new features to the iOS versions and eventually stripped away some features from the desktop version. And I'm going to be trying to think of some of those features that they pulled out, but there was a number of things that they pulled out from the main desktop versions of all their apps. And eventually, they became one app. Now, there are some differences even now today with, say, Keynote for the desktop or laptop versus Keynote for iOS or iPadOS. There are some differences there, but they're pretty insignificant. And you can open up documents on either place using iCloud, and they open up just fine. In the past, you would have some major limitations if you did that. And so, is that what's happening with Logic? They've now released Logic for iPad, and it's a light version of Logic. It doesn't have everything. There's no score editor. There's no groove track. There's no environment. There's not even all the editing things. We don't have true flex, time, pitch. We don't have, if you've used it, there's a ton of things that aren't there. Projects can be opened back and forth. And so that functionality was key to them, but it's not not everything's there on both sides, right? So that part, I think we're pretty aware of the limitations that are there. However, what's next for it? So that's what I want to talk about a little bit, and perhaps offer why I believe that what the roadmap is going to look a lot more like the iPad version than what we've known for all these years as the OS X version. I just don't imagine that we're going to maintain both versions as they currently stand. They're going to get closer together, which means the desktop version is going to sacrifice some things, and the iPad OS version is going to continue to add some things, right? So, what does that look like? And I'm curious for those watching which features you could live without from the desktop version. Which things are in the desktop version that you're like, I don't really need that, right? I found when I was recording out in the field using the iPad version of Logic that I got a lot better at the interface. I've got one of the smaller iPad Pros, so I don't have like the massive screen. So you have to be really economical and efficient with how you're doing things. So if I'm like opening up the library here and also have like the mixer, I mean, that's like, you'll see on the screen here, it gets really crowded really fast. And so you get used to that. You can navigate that pretty easily once you're used to it. Most things you can get used to, right? But what couldn't you live without? That's the question I'm posing to all of you as I talk about some of this stuff. What things in Logic for OS X could you not live without if the only version you had was an iPad version? So let me know in the comments because I'm super curious about that. Okay, here's where some of my fears come from. And I have a lot, not a lot of fears about this, but I have some significant fears about this. Let's go to the App Store for a second. This is GarageBand. I'll start here. Let's look at the version history of GarageBand. GarageBand's been around for a long time, right? The version history in here goes back 8 years. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. 25 updates to GarageBand for iPad OS in the past 8 years. Now, you might be like, well, that sounds like a lot, right? That is so not a lot. 1 7 months ago, 1 10 months ago, 1 year ago. In the 2-year category, there's 3. In the 3 years ago, there was only 1. In the 4 years ago, there was 2. In the 5 years ago, there was more. Actually, probably the most of any year. That's insanity. How few updates are coming for GarageBand for iPad OS. And I would say that matches iOS. So GarageBand for iOS and iPad OS, just over 20 updates in 8 years. If that doesn't make your mind melt a little bit, I don't know what's going to, because that's so few. Is that common? I mean, is that what we have to look forward to? I don't know. Often looking at the history of things is how we tell what the future is. Some of the other apps that we have from Apple, let's do Keynote, for instance. I was just talking about that, right? This has more. There was one month ago, 4 months ago, 8 months ago, 9 months ago, 1 year, a number, and like in 2 years ago, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 updates. So I would say maybe twice as many, maybe a little bit more than twice as many, but still not tons. I mean, these are the Apple products, right? They do tend to save a lot of the bigger updates for when there's system updates. So many things with Apple are tied into the system and how the system works. So we could be looking at things like, okay, once a year, right? Every time they update iPad OS to the newest big version. Because when we have small version updates, we don't often have software corresponding updates. It's usually just the big ones once a year. So we could be looking at the new life of Logic being maybe once a year update. But so far, they just released Logic Pro for iPad, right? How long has it been now? Some time, not tons. A couple months, right? Around a couple months. I've had to pay the subscription fee now, so at least 2 months. And it's a brand new piece of software. And they've done, as far as I can tell, 0 updates, right? Is it possible that Apple released a perfect piece of software that has no bugs? I mean, why haven't we gotten any updates, as far as I can tell, that would address any of the minor bugs and things? Maybe they got it perfect, right? Maybe there's no need for any even small updates on this. I'm being facetious. That's not possible. And so what we're looking at then is already the creep in of more worries on my part that this software is going to be one of the ones that gets updated very slowly. And so we're going to be saddled with additional bugs. I mean, it's Logic Pro for iPad. It's not Logic for iPad. It's not GarageBand with additional features for iPad. I mean, they did leave the Pro in the name. Semantics, right? Who cares that they want to call it Pro, even though perhaps it's not the most pro thing at the moment. So there's that. Let's look at, just as a point of comparison, because this isn't going to tell you everything, but this is Cubasis, right? And Cubasis version history. We haven't had one in 5 months from them, but they're doing, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 or 6 updates a year. And with GarageBand, they were getting maybe 2. This is what I would expect. I mean, these are more like the updates where they're fixing some things. 3.4, 3.4.1, 3.4.2, 3.4.3, 3.5, 3.5.1. And so incremental and fixing things. We'll see if that's what we're going to get with Logic or not. I don't know for sure. But so far, the fact that several months have gone by since release and they're just letting it all slide for the moment. And in grand Apple fashion, and they're allowed to run their business how they want. I feel like Apple can say, you know what, we're never going to address user concerns unless it's really bad, which they did with Final Cut Pro, and Final Cut Pro went to version 10, and they changed everything so drastically. Eventually, they did reach out through people and address some stuff. As one of those instances when they clearly upset a bunch of people and they had to address it. We don't get many of those things with Logic. Not really. So, a couple thought process points here. One of them is Apple just saying, okay, we released Logic Pro for iPad as a subscription model. We know that not everybody likes it, the subscription part of that. You can tell. Let me load this back up on the App Store for a second. We can tell that not everybody likes it because if you look at the ratings on the screen, we're looking at more top 5 stars, lesser 4 stars, lesser 3 stars, very few 2 stars, and then about half of the number of 5 stars we have 1 stars. And those 1 stars are not because the software is buggy. It's not because it doesn't have a lot of features. It's not because it's Logic, something other than Logic. It's because of the subscription model. I guarantee those are people saying, we don't like the subscription model. If I scroll through some of these comments, right there, losers at Apple after buck yet again. I mean, that's what any of the 1 stars are because of the subscription model. So, a few things at Apple I've seen over the years. Something like this when it's unpopular. They did this a little bit with Final Cut. They built the App Store, excuse me, in some ways where some of these things start over with a new version, like when they do a big update, right? I can't actually 100% say that with certainty that it still does it this way, because I haven't been tracking it recently. But I bet you when the new update comes of Logic, all of their little ratings and reviews will like refresh, you know what I mean? So it'll show all of the people. So all of the people who are angry about the subscription model, their 1 stars will like disappear magically. And then everybody who's still using Logic and getting pumped about the iPad version, their higher ratings will show up more. So it's like, okay, it's like maybe they're waiting to do an update until they get all of the negativity out. It could be so petty, but I don't know. Let's see. Philip Benjamin in the comments. How you doing? Thanks for commenting. Hello. The way in which Apple has handled all of their apps non-OS reflects the same attitude. Apple loses interest, no desire to be involved in yesterday's big thing. Developers and executives. The proof of Apple's really not having a servant attitude towards customers. And therefore, all people dealing with Apple have to be cautious. Customers not come first. It's true in many ways. And I believe a lot of this started with Steve Jobs and the way that he saw the world, which was, how to put this delicately and respectfully. But Apple sometimes sees themselves as the savior of the world, right? You see one of their keynotes at one of their big things, and they talk about all the features that are saving people, health-wise or safety-wise, or they add a new phone feature that can hook up to satellites even when you're off the grid, or a watch that you use for diving that can protect you, or all the heart features and all of this stuff. I mean, they really do see themselves in that way, helping people. But they see it in a way as it's always them against all of the norms in the world. And so what they do is they say, we've thought of a better way of doing this than has ever been done before. We don't care if everyone likes it or not. We know, because we have this internal vision, that what we've done is the best. We've done it. It's the best. So, get on board. And if you don't get on board, that's fine. We're just going to keep doing it because we've sold so many iPhones and we have all of this money sitting around that we're untouchable, and we can do whatever we want. It's an interesting mentality. If you want to be a Logic user and always think about the past, then I think that you're in for some rocky roads ahead. With Final Cut, I was one. I loved Final Cut 10 when it came out. Everything except for the magnetic timeline. The magnetic timeline was really hard to swallow because I didn't like that way of putting a story together and having it always like fit in their format. Even Apple has eventually, they still have the magnetic timeline, but you don't have to work with it. So they realized that maybe options every once in a while are good. But I loved everything about Final Cut 10 when it came out. I mean, it spoke to the way that I wanted to work. But on the same hand, I came to it and said, okay, how do you envision this working? It's like, what are you seeing, Apple, as the way that this should work? And so I came at it with that mentality, and I think that I was able to then use it in a way that it fit into the workflow that they saw. If you're willing to do that, if you're willing to take every software update and say, okay, I can be flexible, I can change how I'm working to match the efficiencies of this software, I think then you could use Logic and be a happy user forever. right? If you're willing to like have that flexibility when it comes to the feature set, if you're like, I need to be able to do this a certain way and it has to be my way, then why are you using Logic in the first place? That is not one of the strengths of Logic. And don't tell anybody I said this, but I mean, if that's what you want, if you want to work a certain way and have the software bend to the way that you see things, you should be a Reaper user. And I'm not joking. Because that software has said, end user, you're the one that we want to be happy with this. And we don't want to tell you how to do things. We want you to tell the software how to do things, right? I mean, that's the two sides of this coin. Pro Tools from Avid, is worse than Logic, or traditionally has been. I mean, traditionally they said you can only use our hardware. They eventually gave up on that. They originally said, well, and they might even still, I don't even know. Can you change the key commands in Pro Tools at this point? For so many years, I haven't looked at that feature recently, but you had to use the key commands as they set out. You could never change them. I mean, how inflexible is your thought process to never let people change key commands or how the software looks? Pro Tools and Logic are both very set in how they look. They want to be identifiable instantly. It's part of their marketing. It has to be. Why else would they do that? Reaper, on the other hand, you can change how it looks and make it look like many other things. It's like a chameleon. Okay. So obviously the branding there is more subtle in terms of the visual representation, but Logic and Pro Tools are highly inflexible with some things. So what's next? Because we now have Logic Pro for OS X and Logic Pro for iPad, that means that we are stuck in a vicious cycle for a little while. They can't just update Logic Pro in any significant way without updating the iPad version, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to open each other's files. Now, we just had, not too long ago, Logic Pro 10.7.9, the last of the 7s, right? The 10.7s. And so that one's the last one of that. We're either going to go to 10.8 or we'll go to 11. Your guess is as good as mine this very moment. We haven't heard too many rumors one way or the other, except the higher they get in those numbers, the more they're likely to just jump to the next big one. And so you've got to imagine the slow rate of development right now. It's been slow in terms of Logic Pro for OS X. We didn't even get the new things that the iPad version can do in Logic Pro for OS X. We didn't get the new beat mangling features. We didn't get really anything cool. And so because of that, it begs the question, are we going to get that stuff in the next version? Right? And so that would argue for either a nice 10.8 or, they move it up to 11. They unify the looks more so that the OS X version looks more like the iPad version. We're done, by the way, making the iPad version look more like the OS X version. There's not a single world where that's going to happen, I don't believe, because the push is now going to be, what can we do on the iPad version that's cool, that will draw news, that will, draw publicity, that will be more functional? How do we refine that interface? And at the same time, what can we bring from the OS X version to make it feel more like the iPad version? That's the slope we're on at this point. I can't imagine there's another slope. I just don't see the kind of care. I believe the Logic Pro team cares about people who use it. They haven't just like pulled the rug out from underneath us ever. They're always trying to fix the major bugs that weren't there 2 versions ago, but somehow got added in while leaving the original bugs that have been around for a long time. So, they do care, but they're probably also, given the nature of a piece of software like this, where it's not the iPhone division, right? I mean, we're all clear. iPhone division sells a lot of phones, hardware stuff, right? I mean, those things people want. It's like my parents have iPhones, and they're like of a demographic. I mean, I can't say more without being offensive because I love my parents, but they're of a demographic that's great. They're not really using all of the features of what a phone like that can do, but they have iPhones, right? Cool. My kids, they're going to have iPhones at some point, right? It's like everybody has an iPhone. How many of those people are paying for Logic? It's like everybody who's complaining about the subscription model of Logic Pro should really rethink what they're thinking. Because if Apple can make the subscription model work, it may save Logic Pro in the long run. It might just. And so instead of fighting this and saying, how dare you? I mean, we're looking at companies getting bought left and right. Pro Tools with Avid was for sale. I mean, it's like every day I look around and another company has been sucked into a bigger company, and who knows what they're going to keep. They're going to look at the bottom line and see what has sold and what hasn't. And they're going to put money and invest in the things that will earn them more money. Is any part of this about artistic development or goodwill? Heck no. All of this is a way to build financial, bank accounts for certain groups and companies. And that's what the music business is all about. It's not something where it's like, great, let's celebrate those who are creative and making beautiful things. I mean, geez, that's not what this business is about. There are those in it who want to be able to do that and who actually care about creativity. But that's not what the business part of this is about. And so those coffers, which get bigger when they sell things and smaller when they don't, that's what decides the fate of many of the pieces of software. And as long as they can sell and earn money, then great. If a company like Apple says, we want to do a subscription model for this piece of software, and all their base says, oh, how dare you? How dare you charge us monthly for a piece of software that we paid for once 6 years ago and we've never had to pay updates for? And it's like, geez, switch to something else. But don't switch. I want all of you people to keep using Logic because I like Logic. I like how it works. I'm in this for my own reasons, right? I'm in Logic because when I create something, I just did a short film score recently. I did some videos, actually a little bit about it, but indirectly. And the music turned out great. And a lot of that creative process was because I like working in a piece of software like Logic. It speaks to me. I get to use it. I earn a living off of using Logic to a certain degree. And so I want to keep using it, right? This channel is all about Logic, but I also don't just sugarcoat stuff and say that Logic is the best. I don't think that. It's like a warty instrument sometimes, It's like it has its flaws, and I like the flaws. I'm not against having flaws, but you have to like learn the software and figure out how to get around them and use it in spite of those things. But okay, all of that aside, the subscription model, it's like, who cares? Now, some people are like, well, that's more money than I've spent on it for years. And it's true. I don't think Logic Pro has been like a huge money earner in some ways, but it does have a really important thing or a concept to understand. And that is, when you are a Logic user, the way that Apple has built their empire of Logic, right, is saying we're going to make this, one cost up front, and then we're going to add new features to this software. And when you add those new features, the latest of them, I think, is actually one of the hardest things. I don't think it's going to succeed the way that maybe they were hoping it would be. And that is the spatial audio stuff, right? Because spatial audio is cool for some, but it's not the end all of everything, because a lot of people have a hard time actually making content for and understanding how to use it and consuming it. It's not yet fully taking off. No matter what the people in the industry want you to believe, it's like I talk to people all the time. I have like hundreds of students, and the number of them using spatial audio is very low. They like creating for it. It's kind of cool academically, but those who go home and actually engage with that format is so low that I can't imagine that this is going to pay off the way that the whole industry wants it to. I mean, everybody's like, yes, we're going to turn our students or our studios into these spatial audio things. Speaker sales were like, yeah, let's add a bunch of speakers. Cable manufacturers, more cables. Apple was like, yeah, we'll put this in Logic Pro, and you have to like either buy our headphones or you have to get a silicon Mac, because the spatial features really only work with silicon, right? And so it's like the price you pay to be a Logic user is to upgrade your computer. So anybody who said we haven't spent that much money on Logic, unless you're using a computer you got for free, you've been paying for Logic all along every time you upgrade something. It's like built into the price of admission. If you don't like that price, then definitely switch to a different app. You know what I mean? It's like that's part of this. Let's see. There's a couple other more comments here. Philip had a couple other ones. Dollars and cents attitude. Yep. And this is the obligation of all of us. Yep. And then I miss being able to buy stuff. I miss that too sometimes. But the truth is, I don't mind the subscription model most of the time. It's not a huge amount. It does add up. It's like at one point I was like, I cut the cable cord. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't have satellite TV. I don't have cable TV. I'm just doing, streaming. And we turned around and now I'm streaming from like 8 different places and it's the same price. It's like, The one thing I like about the streaming universe is that I can pay an extra $1 or $2 and not have commercials. I don't watch commercial TV ever. And I never will. I'll pay an extra few bucks easily if it gets rid of commercials. And so that, for me, is a big deal, personally. And I don't mind doing subscription models for things. Like, I have one piece of software that I religiously pay subscription to. If you watch my channel at any point, you'll probably know I talk about Reason. I do pay the subscription for Reason. And I like it, and they regularly give new content and updates and make things work better. And so that seems like value to me. It's kind of expensive, but it's value that I like, and that I use. Logic Pro on the iPad, we don't know yet. I mean, I was expecting a flurry of small updates, right, to fix things. And they're just like silent. And so it makes me wonder, we're going to get something. And I know we're going to get some updates. They're not abandoning a brand new thing. They're very calculated over at that Apple company, right? And I don't know if you've read your user agreement if you have Logic Pro for iPad, but it clearly states in big letters that they can track whatever you're doing. They don't track everything, but they track usage. So they're over there calculating in a spreadsheet with everybody who uses it what features are being used. This is like a mathematical equation, right? They look at all the features that are being used. And then they probably have somebody who's comparing this to the forums and things online, right? So somebody says, they don't have this feature, or, we don't have, or no, let me think. They'll say something like, this feature is the best one on the whole app, and I want them to develop it further. And then they go look at all the usage, and like 1% of the users are using it, right? So 1% of the users are using this feature, whatever it is. They're not going to continue to develop the feature that 1% of the users are using unless they can see that in the long run, they just need to funnel more people towards it. Sometimes there's a feature that's not being used and they're saying, maybe if everybody would use this, it would be better. I can think of a half dozen features like that in Logic Pro for OS X. Like articulations in the instruments. The stringed instruments have this. The brass instrument that are the stock plugins have this. Like nobody's using it. It's one of the most amazing features, but very few software packages use this. They're all doing it their own way. None of them wanted to buy on to the Apple way, as far as I can tell. So an amazing feature that could have at one point been like this incredible thing is just like sitting there, It didn't make it into the iPad version. That should tell you everything. So they have a choice. They can say to the manufacturers of software, it's like, we know that our users spend $1 billion on third-party plugins. And we know this because we track everything. If you want to play with our software nicely, you'll add this feature into all of your software. And so they can coerce, so to speak, manufacturers, developers, coders into using certain things by making it part of the AU audio format. Why do you think Logic doesn't use VST as their plugin thing, right? It means that Apple can control the audio unit format, update it as they want, block out manufacturers that don't play nice. I mean, this is like, you couldn't make this stuff up. It's pretty intense and brilliant in some ways and terrifying in others. So it's definitely a thing. Let's see. What if ads started running ads? I'd be done if they did that. No Destination Really says, what do you like about Reason? I'm going to be honest with you. It's nostalgic for me. It was my first workstation I ever had. And there's a few instruments in it that I love. And if I ever had to give them up, I'd be really sad about. And so, I just really like them. If I ever give up my subscription, I will be auto-sampling those few patches that I have to have, and a few other things as well. But I just like how it feels. I like the aesthetic of it. The sound of it has always been great and interesting. I just really like it for a lot of reasons, but I could live without it if I had to. Let's see. If you pay a subscription and they're not updating close to every 4 months, I think it's a waste. I mean, if I'm paying monthly, they better be doing something monthly is my thought process. It's like, why not just give me a one-time fee if you're going to just do a yearly update? Make me pay upgrade fees once a year, if that's the mentality. if you're doing a monthly thing, there should be something coming down as a constant stream of updates. And that's what Apple seems to sometimes forget, is that I earn that money every month. I work hard for the money I earn, and to give it to them is like a trust thing, right? A two-way street. And right now it's a one-way street, unfortunately, but and yeah, Logic and Ableton both released portable DAWs on the same day. So far, the reception has been it's definitely been lukewarm. I don't think it's been terrific, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be. And so we'll see what happens with it. There's a lot. We could be really surprised, but I'm guessing that we're just going to be mildly disappointed, is my guess. But I'm okay. I'm okay with Logic Pro for iOS, or not for iOS, for OS 10. Even the names are stupid. I mean, come on. Now I got to say like the name of which operating system I'm using in the name of Logic Pro. That's stupid marketing. Eesh. Unless they're exactly the same. And they're not. They're not the same. So it's stupid. I'm okay with Logic Pro for OS 10 losing some features. It has too much. There's some bloat. I'm 1,000% okay with iPad Logic Pro getting better. Because right now, there are some things with it that I can't stand. For instance, file management. That is so bad. It's so iOS, iPad OS, I can't handle it. And calling the tracks MIDI tracks instead of instrument tracks, I feel like people know less about MIDI every year. Let's just load one of these things up. I'm going to show you one thing about this that I hate. Right? So show detail, close the mixer, close that. This window here is the one that drives me the most crazy. I want the instrument in front of me, and I want to be able to do more stuff on the actual face of the instrument. In Logic for OS 10, we have the cool interfaces, which I like. I think visual musicianship is sketchy, meaning, so if you go to like Adobe Premiere, film, video editor, right? Video editor, and you open up like an audio tool in there. It's like a bunch of sliders with numbers, right? Sliders with numbers. That's it. They don't trust. A good video editor doesn't trust a tool like a plugin because it looks fancy. They don't trust something just because it looks fancy. They trust it when it works well. Right? So they actually have to have it sound good, or with their visual tools, if it makes their project look good and works well. In audio, it's like we have to have these stomp box pedals that have like, little shadows where the buttons and knobs are, and it looks like the actual thing or something. We actually have to have things looking great. Otherwise, we don't trust them. If it doesn't look good, then we're like, ooh, that thing doesn't look like it should. It's so backwards. It should sound good, right? Problem is, too many new, young, inexperienced, up-and-coming engineers, audio engineers, trust their eyes over their ears. Not the good ones. The good ones understand that something has to sound right, and they're using whatever tool sounds good. They're actually thinking, I need this tool because it sounds amazing, right? So they're thinking of what does it sound like. The looks of it, maybe for clients. I worked at a studio once that had the money basket, and I'm going to paraphrase the story in case so-and-so is listening. So this isn't exactly right, but had a money basket in the live room where the bands would play, and if a session was wrapping up early, too efficient, and they charge hourly. They would the boss would say, take the money basket out there in the next break. And so the money basket would have like rattles and shakers and the little egg things that, and you set it out there in a place, and the band would come back and they'd be like, ooh, I forgot. We should definitely try one of these like maracas on this thing. And they would spend the next couple hours like experimenting with all these things and realize that at the end, they just went back to the original track and they didn't need any of that stuff. And it was just like a time suck. I mean, first of all, I personally don't work like that myself. I'm more interested in efficiency and helping the band get to their point right off the bat in any way possible. Even my own music, it's like, I'm not going to add a bunch of crap to this. But that mentality of something, I was talking about how it looks as opposed to how it functions, as opposed to this aesthetic of, people going into a studio, wasting time, being inefficient. All of that stuff ties together. Right now, though, even though Logic with all the instruments is going for functionality, big knobs, small knobs, buttons. And for the most part, relatively contrasty, but in some of these instruments, it's horrible. You can't even read the thing. There's too much. It's like nothing about this interface helps me get the sound I want. You can do that. The way that Logic does this with the instruments in OS X, a lot of the design helps you figure out what you're doing to get to the sound you want, by placing key things together in a nice graphical way. The problem with Logic Pro for iPad is that a lot of these instruments just have a bunch of circles with things. And if you don't know exactly what they do, there's no clue given to you by what's on the screen. It's just a bunch of knobs. And if I'm looking for something, I have to freaking have 20/20 vision, perfect lighting, and it's just impossible. So we have room to grow. We have room to grow with this version of Logic. It feels a lot like that was an afterthought. And I'm assuming, dear goodness, that was something that they're going to finish for a future version. Because right now it feels very unfinished. The rest of it is amazing. I love so much working on the iPad version when you've got kind of it more situated under your fingers and can know where things are. Okay. Any other thoughts? Put them in the chat. I'm curious what you're thinking, but we're aiming for about 50 minutes on the stream, so that's a couple minutes away. And if we don't have any other thoughts or something, then we'll pull the plug. But maybe I'll recap this or summarize it by saying, if you love Logic, love it in the way that doesn't make it do exactly what you want. That sounds horrible. Don't expect it to stay the same, because I think that the door has been opened for it to be changing, and the version as we know it, either rapidly, now that the iPad version is out and they can see exactly what everybody's using, or it could be slower, but inevitable. And so I believe that the inevitability of the change of Logic Pro for OS X and it coming to an end as it has existed is just a matter of months, maybe years, but months. And I can't imagine, given what I've seen on the iPad version and what Apple has done with all of its other products and what it wants to do with subscription models. I just don't imagine that it's going to continue as it currently stands. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments, because I'm curious. Mine is just my opinion. based on my own research and observations. And so I'm curious what you're thinking. Let me know. I think that's where we're going to end. See you later.